Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing part 219 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today, quite interesting assortment. This is actually the third time I've had to record this, but we're trying to figure it out. Let's see if this one, third time's a charm. But anyway, interesting assortment. We've got a couple extinct species, including extinct subspecies as well. We've got some modern animals, and of course, some great cakes mods to round it out. So let's get started with the Nubian wild ass, which was done by Sky Polaris. So let's have a look over here. So the Nubian wild ass is the dominant subspecies of the African wild ass. So it's Equus africanus africanus. So these guys are considered to be one of the ancestors of the domestic donkey, which was domesticated about 6,000 years ago. It is presumed, sadly, to be extinct, or it is critically endangered, but there is two populations that may potentially survive in Africa, but also one in the Caribbean, so we'll get a little bit into that soon. So the main differences that you get from the Somali wild ass and the Nubian wild ass is that the Nubian wild asses have longer ears than the Somali wild ass, and they also have a cross pattern, as you can kind of see on there, like that is found on domestic donkeys, but is absent on the subspecies, the Somali subspecies, which we already have in game. And they also lack the zebra-like stripe patterns on the legs that are found in the Somali wild ass. Just another way to tell them apart. So in terms of their habitat, the Nubian wild ass lives in the Nubian desert from northeastern Sudan, from the east of the Nile River, to the Red Sea, and south to the Atbara River and north interior. So that's kind of where they're found. So they sadly are considered, well, most likely extinct, but not extinct in the way is that there's none left, is there's probably no pure ones left because of interbreeding and stuff like that. But the last sort of sightings was the last confirmed sightings of wild asses in their native range was in the 1970s in the Eritrea Baraka Valley, which borders Eritrea and Sudan, and this was confirmed during aerial flights. But similar to the decline of the Somali wild ass, the main reasons the Nubian wild ass has declined is largely attributed to hunting, competition with livestock for the limited resources that the desert provides, and hybridization with modern domestic donkeys. Though there is a couple causes for hope. There's one in 2015. A mitochondrial DNA was conducted on a population of feral donkeys on the Caribbean island of Bonaire. And the studies looked at multiple specimens, DNA samples of Nubian wild asses, Somali wild asses, and also domestic donkeys. And they found that these Bonaire animals were actually very similar to the donkeys, the Nubian wild ass. And research actually published that the modern donkey as well is actually descended from two lineages. Either one is definitely the Nubian wild ass, but the other one is unknown. But the fact they only use one donkey makes that study really inconclusive. And so to kind of find the results, also you just need to put more samples and things. And the study is also thought to be a bit of a bias as well, because the analysis was the result of an outcry by the government of Bonaire to actually cull some of these donkeys. So they may have, tried to create, this as a reason to try and say like, oh, we don't want to cull them, because they're actually the last surviving Nubian wild asses, and it's kind of a way that they're trying to, save that species. But anyway, save that population. The Jebel Italia National Park, which is near the border of Egypt and Sudan, actually does claim to be a home for the Nubian wild ass. However, the purity of these animals has not yet been studied, so they may be completely pure, but we don't know. Highly unlikely, considering I imagine, often one will get out occasionally. But yeah, look at these very little guys. Very, very cute. I'm definitely a big fan of these little goobers. Alright, that's Nubian wild ass done. Next up, we have got the Egyptian mongoose by GreatCakesMods. So let's have a look at these little guys. So this is the Egyptian mongoose. So these guys are also known as the Echinomonde. These guys are a mongoose species native to the tropical and subtropical grasslands, savannas and scrublands of Africa, but also are found across the Mediterranean basin into North Africa and the Middle East, but also the Iberian Peninsula. So quite a wide range there. The Egyptian mongoose has long, coarse fur that is grey and reddish brown and tipped with brown and yellow flecks. Its snout is pointed, it also has quite small ears, and its slender body is about 48 to 60 centimeters, or about just 1.7 to 2 feet long, with a 33 to 54 centimeter or 1 foot 1 to 1 foot 9 inch tail, which has is long with a black tip. Its hind feet and a small area above the eyes is hairless or furless, and it has 35 to 40 teeth with highly developed carnassials, or they're a type of molar that are designed for shearing meat. And they typically weigh between 1.7 to 4 kilograms, and they weigh between 3.7 to 8.8 pounds. And there has been some genetic studies looking at sexual dimorphism, with it being observed in Portugal, with some females being smaller than males, but I'm not sure how well it's studied in other areas of their range. But in terms of their habitat, they tend to live in swampy and marshy habitats near rivers, lakes, streams, or coastal areas. Where they inhabit scrubland in the Iberian Peninsula, they tend to like in woodlands. They've been observed in Portugal from north of the Douro River and south to Spain, and then down into the state of Gibraltar. North Africa, they can be found across the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlas Mountains, and well into Egypt and Sinai Peninsula. In Sudan, they can be found near human settlements, and they've been recorded at elevations between 2 to 3,000 meters in the Ethiopian highlands. They also be found in Senegal. They like open habitats with grasses and often are hunted for bushmeat there. Gabon, they're only recorded in the savanna habitats in the Republic of the Congo. And they've been found in Tanzania, and they can be found all the way down to the coasts of South Africa. Their occurrence in the Iberian Peninsula is very interesting because they're not sure whether they would naturally occur there or they've been introduced by humans. But there's 3 different hypotheses kind of on that idea. So there've been several hypotheses kind of come up with the occurrence of these Egyptian mongooses on the Iberian Peninsula. The first one is kind of the youngest, so they suggest that it would have been introduced following the Muslim invasion of the 8th century. So they were introduced by the Muslims at that time. Bones suggest that have been found, they have been radiocarbon dated to the 1st century, so that's thought they may have been brought over there actually by the Romans to help deal with rats and mice. But another potential explanation is a lot more natural, and they propose that the Egyptian mongoose would have naturally colonized the Iberian Peninsula due to the Pleistocene, as they would have been able to walk pretty much from North Africa through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Iberian Peninsula back in the glacial maximum, which is about 30,000 years ago. So they would have remained isolated from Africa since the last glacial period. So they would have been, naturally there. They would be a naturally occurring species, you could say. But in terms of their ecology and their behavior and all that, they are diurnal, and they tend to live in either by themselves, pairs, or groups up to 5, with adult males actually tending to be quite territorial. Let's see, find them. That's another one to talk about. Let's look at you there. So, adult males will show territorial behavior, but they share their home range with 1 or more females. The home ranges of adult females, though, will overlap to some degree, except in core areas where they will raise offspring. In terms of their diets, they tend to be very generalists. They will prey on rodents, fish, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and insects. They also feed on fruits and eggs, and to crack open eggs, they'll throw them between its legs against a rock and a wall. And looking at the Donano National Park, which is in the Iberian Peninsula, these guys have been radio-tracked and their feces was studied, and it showed they had a lot of European rabbit, sand lizards, Iberian spade-foot toads, greater white-toothed shrew, three-toed skinks, dabbling ducks, egrets, wild boar meat, and mouse and different mice and rat species. So very generalist diet, and they actually did a similar study that looked in their populations in southeastern Nigeria, and they were feeding on giant pouch rats, temrex mouses, Turbrax, Tulbergs, soft-furred mouse, Nigerian shrews, Halliwell's toads, African brown water snakes, and different types of skinks. In Africa, they also feed on venomous snakes, including the Palestine's viper, black desert cobra, and the black-necked spitting cobra. Though it seems in areas in Spain they tend to be less common around. They tend to be less common around areas where the Iberian lynx has been reintroduced. In terms of captivity, though, or reproduction, captive males reach sexual maturity. Males and females reach sexual maturity about 2 years of age. And at Donano National Park, courtship and mating will typically happen between February and June in the spring, and 2 or 3 pups are born between mid-April and mid-August after a gestation of 11 weeks. They are born hairless at first, but they open their eyes after a week, and females take care of them, their babies, for up to about a year, or sometimes a bit longer. They start foraging on their own at about 4 months of age, but compete for food brought back them after that age. And in the wild, they probably reach about 12 years of age, but the captive Egyptian mongoose, there was one that lived over 20 years, and they have a generational length of about 7.5 years. So these guys are luckily considered least concern. They're still quite common, but they are threatened by poaching and by snaring in agricultural areas, and they are sometimes used as parts of animal rituals. But they are considered protected, and they're really only allowed hunting by permits. But they're quite important for culture as well. One of the Egyptian gods, Mafdet, who protected humans from snake and scorpion venom, was depicted often alike with the mongoose, because the mongoose can deal with that. And there have been some preserved or mummified in the tombs, which is quite interesting as well. So very, very cool species, and GreatCakesMod always knocking it out of the park. How can you get mad at a good GreatCakesMods? Anyway, we're going to move on. We've got Monsoon, who's given us another really wonderful mod. So let's have a look at you guys. There's the male there. So here we've got the Chinese Siro, or the mainland Siro. So these guys, Capricornus sumatriensis, is a species of Siro native to the Himalayas, Southeast Asia, and China. So in 1831, Brian Hodgson first described it, a gloat-like animal with short annulated horns occurring in mountain regions of the Sujet and Tessa rivers under the Balaban antelope, and as Balaban was preoccupied, they gave him the scientific name antelope. Then William Albee described it as Capricornus in 1838 and described this guy as the type species for that genus. But there have also been teeth. There is a bit of a fossil record of this guy. Teeth have been found in a dig of Kogsang, which shows that they potentially come from the Middle Pleistocene, so they've been around for about 500,000 years. So the Chinese Siro, or the mainland Siro, possesses guard hairs on its coat that are bright, bristly, or coarse, and cover the layers of fur closest to the skin to various degrees. The animal has a mane that runs from the horns to the middle of the dorsal aspect of the animal, and then between the scapulae, kind of there, and covering the skin. And the horns are only characteristic of the males and are light-coloured, and are approximately about 6 inches in length and curve slightly towards the animal's back. And in the mainland Siro, the males and females are pretty similar in size. They typically reach about 3 feet or a meter tall in height at the shoulder, and typically weigh between about 200 pounds or 91 kilograms. So decent-sized animal. So in terms of their range, the mainland Siro occurs from central to southern China, India, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and the Indonesian island of Sumatra. In Assam, they tend to occupy hilly forests above the elevation about 300 meters, but will come down to about 100 meters in the winter. And in Tibet, they tend to prefer elevations between 2,500 to 3,500 meters, and they kind of like to live in that range there, so that's quite cool. In terms of their behavior and ecology, though, they are quite a cool little group. We'll actually find a baby. We'll look at the baby. Look at them, very cute. So the mainland Siro is territorial, and they either live alone or in small groups, and they're active at various times, so they have peak times of activity during the day and night. So they pretty much just have a sleep, then wake up and have its eating, and then they don't sleep for a certain time of the day. They just go around all day. Females will give birth to a single young after a gestation period of about 8 months. And actually, looking at the fossil record of these guys, fossils of the Kok Song in northeastern Thailand actually suggests that these guys were a forest dweller in those extinct paleo environments, back in the day. Dental microwear texture analysis on both living and fossil populations of the Sumatran or the Suro suggests that these guys were primarily browsing herbivores. So they tend to eat a lot of leaves and not eating grasses. And their browsing activity was dominated by folivory, so that means they eat a lot of foliage and plants and leaves and not grasses, for example. But yeah, they are considered vulnerable, so they are threats. Things like climate change and habitat loss is a big issue for these guys. But yeah, really, really cool to get a good look at these guys. Definitely a big fan. Another great monsoon mod, knocking it out the park. So next up, we have got another Great Cakes mod, as you can see here. We have got Dzungariotherium orgosense. So this is a really, really interesting species here. So you guys will think this guy looks pretty familiar, and he is related to something that you'll think of a lot. So Dzungariotherium is a genus of Paraceratherid, which includes, Paraceratherium, which was a group of large hornless rhinos or rhinocerids, which lived during the Middle to Late Oligocene. And these guys lived into the Middle Late Oligocene of northwest China. And the type species that is depicted here, Dzungariotherium orgosense, was actually described in 1973 based on fossils, mainly teeth, of the Dzungara in Zhejiang, northwest China. So they look very, very similar to your typical Paraceratherium, as we mentioned. The teeth of these guys are actually 25% larger, and this is what they're mainly known from teeth. It's actually 25% larger than those of Paraceratherium translucium. It indicates this guy was actually pretty large in terms of Paraceratherids. But the teeth and skull were actually proportionally larger than those of Paraceratherium, so it likely was a smaller species, with skull lengths ranging between 126 to 143 centimeters, so pretty big. The mass of one specimen was actually estimated to be about 20 tons, which made it slightly larger than Paraceratherium, but again, with a larger skull and all that, I think it's potentially an issue, or potentially that these guys probably just had larger heads and would have been a bit smaller. But anyway, these guys do share a couple traits with one species of Paraceratherium, Paraceratherium bulgensis, which shares a relatively slender maxillae and premaxilla, a shallow skull roof, and a few other features that actually are quite similar in that regard. And the way you can tell them apart from Paraceratherium species is these guys tend to have larger teeth and distinct shapes or crochets to its molars, so that's how you can tell them apart. A lot of mammal species are defined by teeth. And I know you guys love GreatCakesMods, and like what she did for the Paraceratherium, not Paraceratherium, Gigantopithecus, you got 3 different versions. We got 3 different versions of Dzungariotherium today. We've got this kind of one here that's a bit darker. Then we've got this one that's your typical kind of rhino, rhino skin. Most big animals today, are just big and grey, and that's kind of depicted here. But this one's also based on some artwork. I think it's by an artist on DeviantArt. The name escapes me, but you can see this one's trying to be a bit more interesting with the pattern, a little bit of, it looks very tapir-like. And I also like that they've got, the long nose and, the long lips and large ears, which there was a lot of talk about where the Paraceratherium had, like a little trunk and large ears to help with, browsing and keeping, heat, exhaustion away. But this is like a good middle ground. So yeah, not quite a trunk, but, a long lip. And, quite big ears. But yeah, really, really cool. Another cool one by GreatCakesMod, knocking it out the park. So next up, we've got another mod done by Sky Polaris, who's given us the Ethiopian lion. So this is not a distinct subspecies at all. It's really just a small population, and we'll have a look at them as we talk about it here. So this is the Ethiopian lion, which is sometimes called the abyssal lion, is a rare and genetically distinct population of African lion that is found only in the highlands of Ethiopia. While it's not a formally recognized subspecies, these lions are notable for unique genetic markers and physical characteristics adapted to the high altitude environments. Male Ethiopian lions are particularly famous for their impressive dark manes that often extend fully over the head, chest, and shoulders, a trait that may be an adaptation for cooler temperatures of the Ethiopian highlands. Which makes sense considering we're going to talk about the Barbary lion as well. I'll go into a little bit more on that, but yeah, the main colours and sizes on lions tends to be determined by temperature, nutrition, and testosterone, really. So that kind of helps with the theory, cooler temperatures, bigger manes, as the Cape and Barbary lions both lived in high latitudes, which means it was colder. And these guys are, living up on the top of mountains, that's going to be cooler as well. So that's kind of where that's come from there. And also another trait as well, they're generally slightly smaller and more compact than their savanna-dwelling relatives, so, better to conserve heat. Sadly, this population of lions is critically endangered, with estimates of only 2 to 300 individuals surviving in the wild, primarily in the Bale Mountains National Park and in the Semelon Mountains. And they are uniquely adapted for hunting in mountainous terrains, preying on the endemic wildlife of the Ethiopian highlands, such as the mountain nyala, Melalix bushbuck, and Galata monkeys. Their survival is threatened by severe habitat loss, human-wildlife conflict with livestock herders, and the shrinking gene pool. But yeah, luckily there is some efforts to really try and help them. Efforts include community-based conservation efforts to reduce livestock predation, anti-poaching patrols, and genetic studies to understand them. They also hold a lot of cultural importance, featuring prominently on the country's history and symbolism, and also the ancient Ethiopian flags and their current currency. So that's quite cool there. We'll talk about some of these facts here. We already talked about that. They're adapted for living altitudes up to 4,000 meters, higher than any other lion population in the world. They've developed unique hunting techniques for catching Galata monkeys, including hunting during daylight when the monkeys are foraging. We already kind of talked about that. They're quite isolated. And the lion is the national symbol of Ethiopia, appearing on the country's former imperial flag and their currency. So that's quite cool, yeah. Interesting little population there. Cool to see. And look at that beautiful black mane he's got going on there. So yeah, another really cool species that we get to talk about. How can you not like that? Yeah, anyway, we've got another Sky Polaris mod coming up. So this one is the subspecies of an extinct species of lion. This is the Beringian cave lion. Or Beringian, yeah, that's kind of how you say it. So this is the Beringian cave lion. So this is actually the story of the subspecies is very interesting. So in 2001, the subspecies Panthera splaya vereshchangi was actually proposed based on seven specimens that were found in Siberia and the Yukon, which on average had smaller skulls and teeth compared to Panthera splaya or Panthera splaya, which is the European cave lion. That's the one we've talked about in past episodes. If we've talked about cave lions, we've mostly referred to them as the European cave lion, Panthera splaya. But before 2022, 2020, genetic analysis using ancient DNA actually provided no evidence for these distinct subspecies status, with DNA signatures from Panthera splaya or European specimens and Beringian, North American specimens being completely considered basically indistinguishable, which suggested one large population. Though, however, looking at mitochondrial DNA, sequences of 31 cave lions actually show that they fall into two monophyletic clades, or two clades of one ancestry. So not like a polyphyletic, lots of different ones, but just one single ancestry. And so how that was defined was kind of going back to those old populations we've got. The European or Western European population, which was Panthera splaya, the European cave lion. And then we've got the Beringian population, which is now considered a distinct subspecies, Panthera splaya vereshchangi. So what likely the differences I mentioned, they've got smaller skulls and teeth. It's likely we see this trend in actually a few animals from Siberia, like mammoths. The mammoths of Siberia tend to be a little bit smaller. This could be potentially due to it being more of a desert, even though today the Bering Land Bridge is underwater. At the time, it was quite extensive dry grasslands, almost desert-like. So potentially there would have been a lot less food to go around for a lot of these animals, which is interesting. Yeah, but yeah, really, really cool that we got to see the subspecies there. But yeah, bloody awesome. Really, really cool. Another cool mod by Sky Polaris. But last but certainly not least, we've got another really cool mod we've got from Great Cakes. We have got the Barbary Lion. So let's have a look at this guy here who's having a good sleep. So this is another one done by GreatCakesMods. So this is the Barbary lion. So these guys were a population of the lion subspecies Panthera leo, or the northern lion. They're also called the North African lion, the Atlas lion, or the Egyptian lion. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the characteristics and then go through why they went extinct and all that. So typically, Barbary lion specimens typically range from light to dark tawny colours, with males having manes of varying colorations of length. Head to tail length for stuffed males in zoological collections tends to range between 2.35 and 2.8 meters, or 7'9" to 9'2", and of females around 2.5 meters or 8'2". Skull size varied from 300 about 30 to 37 centimeters, or about 1 foot to 1'2", as well. So they're quite big skulls, and females got average about 8 feet and 8 feet 2 inches in length, while males got up to 9 feet 2 inches in length, ranging from 7 to 9 feet, which is interesting as well. Some manes also extended over the shoulders and under the belly or elbows, with the mane here being about 8 to 22 centimeters, ranging for 3 to 8 inches long. In 19th century hunter accounts, these guys were claimed to be the largest lions, so they would believed to be the weight of wild males between 270 and 300 kilograms, or between 600 and 660 pounds, but yet the accuracy of these claims is questionable, since most captive Barbary lions were actually much smaller, because they were kept under poor conditions, and may not have attained that full potential size that they could have had if they were in the wild. But as we mentioned, kind of talked about before, a lot of the times this subspecies was defined by its mane, but the color and size of its mane was actually long thought to be, a different, significantly distinct morphological characteristic that occurs to the subspecific status of these lions. But mane size actually, or mane development, also varies a lot depending on age and between individuals of different regions, and therefore is not a good character for designating subspecies and things like that. The size of manes, so if a lion has a really big mane, does not mean it's related to a Barbary lion. It just has a big mane, pretty much. But the only way to really tell if a modern lion has descended from or has relatives that are Barbary lions, the mitochondrial DNA supports that genetic distinctiveness. So there is a unique halotype of lions of Barbary descent. So you have to do a DNA test to figure out if your lion is a Barbary lion. Not just if it has a big mane, but the presence of the halotype is actually considered quite reliable for identifying captive Barbary lions. And it's believed these guys would have developed their long manes like the Ethiopian lions and the Cape lion, as I mentioned before, because of the lower temperatures of the Atlas Mountains, as it was colder there than a lot of other African regions, particularly in the winter. And results of long-term studies on lions in the Serengeti National Park indicates that ambient temperature, nutrition, and the level of testosterone typically influences the color or size of lions' manes. So it's not really that much to do with genetics. So, sometimes a lot of testosterone gives you a darker mane. If it's colder, having a bigger mane is advantageous to keep you warmer. And, good nutrition means you can grow a lot of hair and you're a healthy lion. Originally, they were considered their own different subspecies, Panthera leo abradicus. But as of 2017, they were all lumped into the northern and southern subspecies of lions. So these guys are part of the northern population, are actually closely related to the Asian lion, which is, famous for having quite a small mane. But that shows, as I mentioned before, just because you have a big mane doesn't mean you have a Barbary lion. They're related to genetics, and they live in different habitats. This again, India is quite a bit warmer than the Atlas Mountains, so they didn't need that big mane. But anyway, there is some genetic research looking into these lions, trying to figure out, kind of what halotypes and stuff is going on there. They believe these guys fossils have been found of these guys from between 100 to 110,000 years ago. And even though they look quite distinctive morphologically, they seem to be not that different genetically. Um, as actually studies looking to these captive lions show that they weren't really that different. Like if you looked at their DNA, you couldn't tell the lions apart. Um, but there seems to be a group, as I mentioned, there's a group of MDNA or MDNA of a group of lions that left Africa about 118 million years ago, and this would have gone north and then broke up within Africa and then West Asia. So these would have been the ancestors of the modern Barbary and then your Asian lions potentially. So it's quite interesting. And lions in Africa constitute a single population that interbred during several waves of migration that happened during the late Pleistocene. And there is populations or lions that share a lot of DNA between the northern and southern subspecies. So there's definitely a lot of breeding between them, but these distinctions are quite general, as you can kind of see there. But yes, we'll go into the distribution. As I mentioned, they live in North Africa for about 110,000 years. They lived across the mountains of the Maghreb in North Africa through Morocco into Egypt. They were sadly eradicated following the spread of firearms and bounties, for these lions, and were eradicated pretty much. Today, they are locally extinct in the region. Historical sightings and hunting records show that they lived up in Algeria up to the early 1960s and Morocco up to the mid 1960s, where they would have lived in Mediterranean forests, woodland, and scrubs. And yeah, they likely would have been extinct in that area. In the 1830s, they would have been pretty much eradicated from most of the Mediterranean Sea and Libya as well. And there's a historical accounts of these guys in Egypt, but they believed would have gone extinct, around the second millennium BC. But also desertification would have contributed to leading this subspecies to be a lot less common, or leading this population. But what's also interesting about this lion is what it lived with as well, as we'll get into. In the earliest 20th century, when they were considered quite rare, they still lived in groups that were quite similar to modern lions. They were sighted either in pairs or in small family groups with a male and female with a couple cubs. Between 1839 and 1942, sightings of wild lions involved solitary animals or pairs of family units, so they would have lived in prides even though they were under a lot of hunting pressure, more similar to their sub-Saharan relatives. Where the density of lion populations would have been lower than in those moister habitats. What's really interesting though is the prey these guys would have encountered. A lot of, because of the Strait of Gibraltar in the middle of their habitat, there was a lot of mix of European and African fauna. As we mentioned, the Egyptian mongoose might have migrated that way. But we believe that in the Atlas Mountains there would have been the Barbary stag, which is a subspecies of red deer. Also, wild boar and aurochs would have lived there as well, and also the Atlas bear, which was a brown bear population that lived in the Atlas Mountains. Those are all considered typically European fauna, or the extinct aurochs, lived there as well. But then you also have a lot of African fauna living there, like the Barbary lion. You also have the African leopard, which is known from there. You also had elephants from there as well, and all sorts of different species of gazelle. So it was a really interesting hodgepodge of different faunas from that time, from the European and African faunas. But yeah, they are believed to be found in menagerie. They were kept a lot of menageries in the Middle Ages that were Barbary lions, and there's genetic evidence to suggest that they were Barbary lions. And though that zoos today, they tend to not worry about subspecific, so they just breed lions with lions. There is potentially a lot of captive lions in Europe and America would have been descendants of Barbary lions. And they do try to create a stud book. They develop a stud book to kind of track which ones have Barbary ancestry and stuff like that, and try and keep the population alive as well. But yeah, these lions would have been quite culturally significant across their range. They are featured a lot in early Egyptian art and a lot of Egyptian art as well, with the lion-headed deity Sekhmet, who was thought to be a protector of Egypt as well. There's also mummified lions found in there was like one found in a tomb of Maya, and then necropolis dedicated to Tutankhamun as well. These lions were also used as a lot as well in the the amphitheaters, the Roman. The Roman, Colosseum and stuff like that. These were the lions they used because they were the biggest and most impressive. But yeah, really, really cool mod done by Great Cakes. Really nice to see a Barbary lion with a lovely, large, flowing mane. I've also got the female here. How cute is she? Really, really awesome mod there, really creative. You know, a lot of people don't like the Frontier baseline, but Great Cakes did a great job, you know, with these. She's done a few different populations and stuff now, so it really looks awesome and done a really awesome job. So, yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. First, I'm going to thank everyone. You know, thank you very much, Great Cakes. She's done a great job with your Mongoose and your Dzungariotherium, and also Barbary Lion. You all did a great job. Sky Polaris did a great job with the Wild Ass, but also the Cave Lion and the Ethiopian Lion. All really good picks as well. And Monsoon, of course, you did a great one with the Suro. So, yeah, I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you guys like and subscribe, always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified below new things. So, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.